Throughout millions of years, nature in the Alps has been reshaped time and again. As ice ages came and went, plants and animals deserted the vast mountain range. Some returned in changed shape. Others came from afar as new immigrants. Some were looking for fresh opportunities and settled in high regions that had never been colonized. Others formed alliances with existing forms of life, or they continued old conflicts. When large herds of deer, ibex and chamois moved into the Alps, predators followed. One hunter, however, has left his impact on the Alps like no other: man. Man entered these mountains at the end of the last ice age. It was the beginning of a revolution in the realm of the golden eagle. Among all the alpine hunters, wolves are the most adaptable predators. This has enabled them to colonize even the most inhospitable corners of the earth. Teamwork and the ability to learn have proved key advantages in adapting to difficult terrain. With the exception of frozen rivers, perhaps. Wolf populations flourished in the vast primeval forests that began to spread across the Alps after the last ice age. The woodlands were also home to another legendary inhabitant of the Alps, the European bison, a close relative of the American buffalo. Bulls can weigh up to almost a ton. Bisons are Europe's heaviest land animals. Today, only a small population survives in the last wild forests of Poland. There was a time when bisons roamed almost all the woodlands of the continent. For hundreds of millennia, they were hunted by the big predators. The bisons, too, were part of the heritage of the ice ages that began some 1.5 million years ago. Ice shields more than a mile high covered great parts of the northern hemisphere. From time to time, the ice receded, but only to return again. In this hostile environment, a new species gained ground. Upright walking primates wandered from Africa northward into Europe. "200,000 years ago, man began to spread out across the continent. A wealth of game attracted these hunter-gatherers to the more easily accessible fringes of the Alps. These early Europeans respected the wolf as similar to their own kind. Like them, the wolf was a hunter. It was probably some 100,000 years ago that a long-lasting friendship began. Wolves became man's companions and, finally, helpers in hunting and guarding. Wild wolves and men hardly crossed each other's paths. The land was vast and only thinly settled. The wolves had enormous territories to themselves, and a rich supply of prey supported large packs. Only when man began to persecute the wolf did it become a creature of the night. Before that, wolves hunted in bright daylight. In winter, hunger drives the wolves up to the higher, steeper regions beyond the timberline. Howling is a far-reaching signal of a pack's presence in an area. Wolves need this joint howling to encourage each other before a hunt. And courage is needed now. A heavy winter storm is brewing. Such hunting trips in high terrain are risky. The greatest risk is not slipping and falling off steep cliffs, but the constant danger of avalanches. The sky has cleared again, but the wolves make a sad discovery. One member of the pack has not survived the storm. The survivors seem hesitant to leave. It's almost as if they were in mourning. The pack is well organized, with specific roles and tasks and a hierarchy. Although the alpha wolf is pressing on, some find it hard to part from their dead kin. A distant silhouette on the horizon explains why the wolves have taken the trouble to come up here in the first place. The hunt follows a clear strategy. Some of the wolves drive the prey into a panicky flight. Others cut off the escape routes and get ready for the ambush. Whenever ravens witness such a chase, they stay nearby, full of anticipation. The chamois is a hefty meal for the wolves. First, the bowels are opened to get to the inner organs. Heart, liver, and lungs are reserved for the leader. Access to the quarry is ruled by the pack's rank order. The wolves' hunger is proverbial. They never know when they will make another kill, so they eat as much as they possibly can, up to 20 pounds of meat at one time. For the ravens, this was worth waiting for. With the retreating Ice Age glaciers, the culture of the hunter-gatherers also disappeared. A new way of life began to take hold. Men settled down and developed early forms of farming. The Neolithic Revolution combined ploughing the ground and breeding livestock. To get more grazing land, mountain forests were cleared, while in the valleys, woodlands gave way to crop fields. The final breakthrough of agriculture came with a mass migration of peoples from the east into Central Europe. By the Middle Ages, the face of the Alps was radically changing. On ever-increasing pastures, more and more sheep and goats were grazing. Conflict with the indigenous hunters of the mountain forest could no longer be avoided. They were losing their habitat as well as their prey at a fast rate. The livestock grazing on the high alpine pastures was well fed and not particularly fast. How could a wolf resist this temptation? Wolves learned to wait for the dark before coming close to human settlements. Nightly encounters with the uncanny beast fired the imagination, and wild stories about bloodthirsty monsters made the rounds. The invisible howling beast was thought to be in alliance with the devil, or even the incarnation of Satan himself. The church provided the thought patterns for human fears and made the wolf a scapegoat. Wolves and men had become competitors for natural resources. In order to handle his fear of natural threats, man invented myths and fairy tales. The legend of the big bad wolf began. But people did not stop at telling gruesome stories. Wherever the wolf was found, it was exterminated. killing frenzy was without parallel. Never in human history had a creature attracted such bitter hatred. In the Middle Ages, the crusade against this incarnation of evil reached its climax. By the beginning of the 19th century, the wolf was practically extinct in the Alps. This alpine village is like a window into the past. Since the Middle Ages, things up here have hardly changed at all. With many alpine communities being cut off from the outside world, people had to fend for themselves. When mining began to flourish, the demand for food rose. Not only mountain farmers had to be fed, but thousands of miners as well. The forest paid the bill. The man-made upper tree line, in many places some 400 meters below the natural one, had reached its present state as early as the 14th century. But, incidentally, man had also created the greatest biodiversity in the Alps. On mountain meadows, there are innumerable species in a limited space, a wealth of colorful flowers and even more insects. On especially favored slopes, there are more than 1,000 kinds of butterflies spread over a few square miles. Haymaking keeps these meadows clear of shrubs, so that smaller plants that would otherwise stand little chance to grow here can flourish. The scythe treats all plants alike, in contrast to very selective livestock. When the full beauty of the wildflowers has mostly faded in late summer, people come to harvest hay like they have done for centuries. Even in these modern days, traditional tools are used. The slopes are too steep for anything but the scythe. It has always been dangerous work. Large-scale forest clearings had an unwanted side effect. Ground erosion led to landslides. Falling rocks and avalanches were no longer stopped by the forest. Some of the rules governing the forces of nature were little understood in former days. In order to contain their fears, men glorified the powers of nature. Many myths and fairy tales were actually based on true observation, but often coupled with false interpretation. Griffon vultures were seen eating a cow's carcass, but did that mean they killed the cow? Today, people know better. Any child in the Alps is aware that griffons live on nothing but carrion. griffon vultures have always been mere summer visitors in the Alps. Their breeding grounds lie far south along the Mediterranean coast. Perhaps this has saved them. Other animals of smaller range were much easier targets for human persecution. Many of the big predators in the Alps were persecuted as either pests or evil demons, and some animals became victims of folk medicine. Ibex blood was believed to remove bladder stones. Their horns were a magic protection against bad luck, and their feces was taken as a medication against tuberculosis. Heroic hunters did the rest. At the end of the 19th century, the total number of ibex in the entire Alps could be counted on 2 hands. At that time, the alpine brown bear was long gone. In 1913, the last bearded vulture was shot in the Italian Alps. In 1865, the Matterhorn, the last of the great peaks of the Alps, was conquered. The early alpinists must have felt lonely at the top. Most of the big alpine animals were already extinct or greatly decimated. The mountain pioneers drew after them scores of tourists. Like an unknown planet, the Alps were unexplored, a landscape of superhuman dimension, dangerous and mysterious, and therefore attractive to the bored upper classes. Summits were conquered, great peaks defeated. Climbing became a symbol of man's ability to subdue the forces of nature. The greatest promise held out on Europe's roof was escape from civilization, which, in turn, led to a new love of nature. The climbing tourists won a new perspective of wild nature. From a dark and dangerous place, the Alps changed into a gigantic sports arena with a grand view and, later, into a scenic jewel worth preserving. Yet something was missing in this pure wilderness. All the creatures that had been persecuted, hated and driven to extinction in centuries past. Only in recent decades has massive human support enabled many of the typical alpine animals to return to the realm of the golden eagle. The chances for their return have never been as good as today. Fewer and fewer people are willing to live in remote mountain areas all year round. The mountain forests have been spreading again. There is more wildlife in the Alps than there was 2 centuries ago, a situation that has also helped this elegant glider to return. This young bearded vulture is in the hands of scientists, and here it is safe. Some of its feathers are being bleached so it can be identified from a distance. The bird is ringed, so that its migrations can later be documented. Since 1986, bearded vultures have again been released in the Alps. Their absence from the alpine skies had lasted almost a century. For the biologists, the bearded vulture is not an easy case. The birds have to survive a vulnerable juvenile stage of 6 to 8 years. Only then are they sexually mature and can contribute to building a new population. Releasing this young bird into the wilderness is only a first step. At this stage, no one can tell whether he will be able to mate and breed. This bird has been raised in captivity. It still needs to learn the rules of the wilderness. The young bearded vulture is facing an uncertain future. First, it needs to recover from the stress of being placed in a new environment. A large-scale bearded vulture repopulation program has so far been an absolute success. Individuals have been released in the Austrian, French and Swiss Alps. Meanwhile, some 80 of these giant birds live again in the Alps. The youngest member in the Alpine Club doesn't yet quite trust its flying skills. Of all the raptors in the Alps, vultures boast the most effective ratio of body weight to wingspan. This enables them to effortlessly ride rising thermals. The young bearded vulture quickly gains confidence in the state of gliding. The youngster is not exactly welcomed by his own kind. He is attacked by an older male whose airspace he has obviously violated. The young intruder got the message. He will have to leave this valley and look for his own territory. The owner of the territory maneuvers himself into a pillar of warm air and rises. Flying a long drawn curve over the valley, he marks his dominion. The bearded vultures needed human assistance in order to return to the Alps. Other animals need nothing but a little tolerance. Brown bears can extend their living space along existing woodland corridors, if they are allowed to. The bear's first steps back into the forests of the Alps are hesitant, but there is an upward tendency. Since the early 90s, bears have been present and are reproducing. In Austria alone, there are now 35 brown bears. Another European hunter has also been able to reconquer long-lost territory in the dense undergrowth of the mountain forest. Where orchids blossom, the lynx can thrive as well. By the end of the 19th century, the big cats had completely disappeared from the Alps, but for some years now, they have again been a constant element of alpine wildlife. It is hard to imagine how the lynx was once demonized as a bloodthirsty monster that killed innocent lambs. Today, wildlife is seen in a more sober light. Within a large territory of about 60 square miles, the average lynx hunts 50 roe deer each year, a rather small price to pay for the return of this beautiful cat. As long as 30 years ago, attempts were made to reintroduce the lynx in Austria, Switzerland and Slovenia. Today there are about 150 lynxes in the hidden valleys of the Alps. To this day, the highest mountain regions have remained largely untouched by human influence. The greater part of the high summits has been too inaccessible. To this fact, today's Europe owes its vastest unspoilt wilderness. This was the golden eagle's great advantage for a new start, and this has made the preservation program dedicated to him the most successful of all. In winter, the eagle's survival depends on avalanche victims. For months on end, chamois and ibex who have been caught in the violent snow masses are the eagle's only food resource. A chamois like this one is a treasure and assures food for weeks. But sometimes a shocking surprise may be in store. This method of capturing eagles is ancient, and it's been resurrected by a daring biologist, this time to the bird's advantage. The eagle may not see the advantage, and his captor's fingers take a good beating. Eagles need vast areas. A breeding pair claims up to 60 square miles for its hunting ground. In order to find a territory of its own, a young eagle has to fly hundreds of miles. In order to gather hard facts about these migrations, this eagle is fitted with a GPS satellite transmitter. All his movements can thus be recorded. Meanwhile, the number of golden eagles in the Alps is higher than it was 200 years ago. Since eagles require such large territories, their number in the Alps is naturally limited. Meanwhile, the eagles can again support a stable population. The sky above Europe is now replete with these majestic birds of prey. chamois too stood on the brink of extinction by the end of the 19th century, but their populations have been able to stabilize. "200 years ago, only a handful of ibex had survived. The Italian king, Emmanuel II, realized the value of these last survivors in the Gran Paradiso Mountains and decreed their protection. Today's ibex owe their existence to this royal whim. The motive of bringing the ibex back, however, had little to do with conservationist ideas. Paradoxically, it was the gentry's desire to hunt big game that brought the ibex back. The European otter is also returning to its original habitats. But of all the homecomers, the otter is up against the stiffest resistance. In the debris of the high mountains, the otter is a rare guest and makes the ibex wonder. Otters sometimes go to great lengths to explore new habitats. On the snowfields on Europe's roof, this otter is merely passing through. His destiny is the river on the other side of the mountain range. Natural riverbeds with small lagoons and shallows are especially attractive for otters. If the vegetation along the banks is dense enough, an otter may even decide to settle down. Although natural rivers have become rare in the valleys of the Alps, there are a few areas where otters now thrive. Many waterways have been artificially regulated and are running between concrete banks. Dams and power stations have destroyed the natural dynamics of these rivers. The otter needs fluctuating water levels and irregular banks. In order to catch a fish, he must be able to chase it into a small bay or a rocky niche. With unparalleled elegance, the otter glides along in the swift current. Any attempt of the prey to escape sideways is immediately countered. The otter's feeding habits have always irritated fishermen. No wonder when fish are farmed and released into rivers just to provide fishing pleasures and food for man. Pond owners and fishermen became the otter's most bitter enemies. For thousands of years, alpine lakes have been a source of food for humans. Especially the Arctic char has always been appreciated as a delicacy. During the Ice Age, These fish came from the Arctic to the lakes on the northern fringe of the Alps. Because of its inherited adaptation to the cold, the char has found these mountain lakes an ideal habitat and has been very productive. These fish, however, are not caught for the table. Most of them are directly released back into the lake. The sexually mature females are sorted out to extract their eggs, so they will not be destroyed by predators. Some of these eggs are used to farm marketable fish. By this method, the natural population in the lake is preserved. Alpine nature offered much to man that could be turned to profit, but whatever stood in the way of man's interest was recklessly persecuted and destroyed. Sometimes, though, the ghosts of the past return. They are coming into the Alps from the south and southeast. For centuries they had been demonized and driven to extinction, but now they are back. They survived in remote refuges on the Balkan and Apennine peninsulas. Meanwhile, wolves are again spreading northward on secret paths. Since 1992, wolf packs have repeatedly been sighted in the French and Italian Alps. The populations are growing. There is new hope for the wolf, and this female is contributing to it. Pregnant for 2 months, she has withdrawn into her underground den to give birth. Outside, the male is guarding the den. The moment of birth is precisely chosen. The mother has been able to build her reserves. During their first months, her cubs will not lack food. They will have a good start into their first winter. The newly born is carefully licked clean. Only when conditions are extremely favorable will a litter consist of more than 6 cubs. The little ones only open their eyes when they are 2 weeks old. In Europe, most wolf packs are as small as possible, 2 adult animals and their cubs. In this way, wolves adjust to the supply of food in their territory. This makes the male's role more important. He can hunt so the female can stay close to the den and the litter. The hungry mother wolf is also the alpha female of the pack. Only the alpha pair is allowed to reproduce. The den is sometimes an extended badger den, but mostly wolves dig their own tunnels. In recent years, they've done so again in the French and Italian Alps. Meanwhile, several packs totaling about 30 individuals are established here. After a short break, the mother is back again to suckle the cubs. The tiny wolves have to grow rapidly. During their first 2 months, they gain almost 20 pounds in weight. Well strengthened and with curious eyes, the cubs first leave the den after 4 weeks. They are the hope for the future. Each year, the wolf population in the Alps is growing stronger. The chances for the wolf's return have never been as good as today. For centuries, the deer and chamois populations have not been as strong. Traditional farming in the Alps has been on the retreat for decades. These cubs are taking their first shaky steps on the way to their ancestors' home. Whether they will be successful depends on whether we can accept the wolf back, and whether a century-old prejudice can be buried. Then the wolves will not even need our help. They'll be able to return to Europe's highest wilderness on their own strength. At the dawn of the 3rd millennium, accepting the wolf's claim of his former home is the greatest challenge for wildlife conservation in the Alps, in the realm of the golden eagle.